when and why to use spool caps to your advantage. So there are many different kinds of spool caps. It's annoying. They're all different sizes as far as the holes on the inside, so you can't really use ones that aren't designed for your machine. Always use the correct spool caps. So for this example, I'm going to use these spool caps. These are for brother and baby lock machines. I also have one tiny one as well that I'm not going to be using for this. So some brands have 2 sizes, some have more. The size is important, and I'll show you why. So here's a spool of thread. Most spools of thread, no matter how good they are, have little imperfections on the edge, little sharp pieces of plastic that stick out. And as your thread is exiting the spool and going into the machine, it's going to get caught momentarily on those little pieces of sharp plastic. If that happens, it's going to make the thread really tight through your machine, and it can bend your needle just slightly, momentarily, and cause damage. So spool caps are really important. They don't only hold the spool in place, but they give it a smooth transitional surface for the thread to exit the spool and get into your machine without getting caught. So thread delivery is one of the most important things in a sewing machine. And as an example, here's a small spool cap. This doesn't do the job. It may hold the spool in place, but it's not going to give a transitionary surface. That thread's still going to ride up against the spool. And in the opposite way, this one will do the job of keeping the thread away from the spool as it exits, but it's creating a really steep angle to go into the machine. That can cause problems too. You want to use the smallest spool cap that's available that still has a larger diameter than your spool of thread, so that when the thread exits, it's going to ride on the edge of the spool cap and then go into your machine without ever touching the spool at all. And that will alleviate some of the damage that happens to machines when thread delivery is a problem, when thread gets tight momentarily and bends your needle and causes damage to the bobbin case, the hook, the needle itself. So spool caps are super important. And you're going to use these anytime you have a spool of thread that has 2 ends like this. You might not need it if it's a single-ended spool. But those you probably want to use vertically pulling up anyway. You're not going to be using those horizontally. You can, and there's ways of getting around it. But for basics, spool caps are typically used for spools like this that have a plastic end where thread can get caught on. So that's the basics. Use the spool caps that go with your machine. Use the smallest one that still has a larger diameter than your spool of thread. You should be good to go. Well, that's the basics on spool caps. See you next time.